Whereas it is my understanding a bylaw is defined as a rule of a corporation, and whereas it is my understanding corporations are legal fictions and require contracts in order to claim authority or control over other parties, and whereas I understand that a principal has a duty to ensure that the people acting as their agents understand the source, nature, and limits of their authority in their mandates, and where it is my understanding that legal fictions lack a soul and cannot exert any control over those who are thus blessed and operate with respect to that knowledge as only a child would allow a soulless fiction to dictate one's actions. Whereas it is my understanding that I have the right to use my property without having to pay for the use or enjoyment of it, and whereas it is my understanding that a summons is merely an invitation to attend, and the ones issued by the New Brunswick Securities Commission create no obligation or dishonor if ignored, and where it is my understanding that all existing courts and governments are de facto and not de jure, and where it is my understanding peace officers have a duty to distinguish between statutes and law, and to represent one as the other is equal to fraud. Where it is my understanding peace officers have a duty to distinguish between statutes and law, and those who attempt to enforce statutes against a freeman on the land are in fact breaking the law. The Magna Carta had 61 clauses, the most important of which may have been number 39. No freeman shall be captured or imprisoned except by lawful judgment of his peers or by the common law of the land. This does not benefit the statutes. To all freemen of our kingdom we have also granted, for us and our heirs forever, all the liberties written out below, to have and to keep for them and their heirs, for us and our heirs forever. And whereas I have the power to refuse intercourse or interaction with peace officers who have not observed me breach the peace, and whereas permanent estoppel by acquiescence barring any peace officer or prosecutor from bringing charges against a freeman on the land under any act is created if this claim is not responded to in the stated fashion and time, and whereas there is a number designated as code number on the face of my registration certificate form 3, number withheld for security reasons, and whereas there is an unidentified number on the back of my birth certificate, and where it is my understanding that said number is a bond tracking number, and where it is my understanding that the bond evidenced by that number generates a revenue every year, and where it is my understanding that the revenue generated forms part of the federal transfer payment sent to the provincial governments every year, and where as either the Minister of Finance or the Receiver General is standing as the fiduciary agent in trust for me over my bond and the revenue generated by it, and where it is my understanding that I have the right to terminate the duties of said fiduciary if doing so is in my best interest, and where it is in my understanding that if and when I do terminate the duties of my fiduciary agent, any commercial instruments, documents, or other paper which they presently hold in trust for me immediately revert to my ownership. Whereas I do hereby claim the bond numbered referenced my birth certificate, the files held in trust by the Minister of Finance or Receiver General, as the case may be, are mine, and where it is my understanding that I have the right to a full accounting of that bond and the account, and where it is my understanding any dishonor will result in an immediate summary judgment order ordering the release of my bond to me and the seizure for abandonment of the performance bond of the fiduciary, and failure to do as ordered may also result in criminal charges for nonfeasance, malfeasance, breach of express contract, breach of implied contract, breach of trust, and for contravention against Section 337 of the Criminal Code of Canada. Whereas I understand ignorance of the law is of no excuse for breaking the law, where it is my understanding there is a corporation with the name Canada, Central Index Key 0000230098, registered in the Securities Exchange Commission, and that its business address is the Canadian Embassy, 1746 Massachusetts Avenue, Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036. Therefore, be it known to any and all that I do hereby terminate the fiduciary responsibilities of the Federal Minister of Finance and the Receiver General, as the case may be, over my bond number that is referenced on said birth certificate. B. I demand under Section 337 of the Criminal Code of Canada that the bond documented number be immediately turned over to me via secured registered mail in care of the address below. The demand and full accounting of my ex-fiduciary of all monies ever collected or paid into or out of this account, who they were collected from and paid to, and under whose authority those transactions occurred. Whereas I understand any dishonor will result in an immediate summary judgment ordering the release of my bond to me and the seizure for abandonment of the performance bond of the fiduciary, and failure to do as ordered may also result in criminal charges for nonfeasance, malfeasance, breach of express contract, breach of implied contract, breach of trust, and for contravention against Section 337 of the Criminal Code of Canada. Whereas I understand that ignorance of the law is of no excuse for breaking the law, and where it is my understanding that a statute is defined as a legislated rule of society which has been given the force of law, and where it is my understanding a society is defined as a number of people joined by mutual consent to deliberate, determine, and act for a common goal. And whereas I have read with mine own eyes Genesis 1:29, and God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which the fruit of the tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. And I understand that none shall be parted of gifts given of God. I claim herbal foods and medicinal rights of use of such plants as bear seeds and are green. Or it is my understanding that Controlled Drugs and Substances Act is a statute, and whereas maritime law meets common law only through contracts and has no power to sway or compel a freeman on the land in lawful pursuit of his rights and duties. Or it is my truth that preservation of life is a duty and an honor, where it is my intent to exercise my right to the use of herb known as marijuana for medicinal reasons as a duty to my life and others, as it is fundamentally lawful, and where it is my intent to exercise my right to grow marijuana for my personal use, and whereas I desire to establish a legal foundation to exercise my right to possess, use, and carry and otherwise enjoy marijuana, whereas I understand that with this notice I do hereby establish through lawful means that legal right. And whereas I desire to establish a lawful foundation known as the heirs according to the promised foundation, and whereas I understand that with the notice I do hereby establish that lawful right. Whereas I understand that by serving this instrument upon the Attorney General, I am serving it upon all peace officers under his authority. And whereas I understand that by serving it upon any peace officer, I am also serving it upon the Attorney General. And whereas the word confiscate legally means to remove without legal right, and whereas I understand peace officers who confiscate my property are trained to use deadly force and are in fact stealing and acting under the color of law, therefore, be it known to any and all concerned and affected parties that I, Freeman John Charles of the Spenceley family, a freeman on the land, do hereby state clearly, specifically, and unequivocally my intent to peacefully and lawfully exist, free of statutory obligations, restrictions, and maintain all rights at law to trade, exchange, and or barter, as doing so must be fundamentally lawful. To travel peacefully and lawfully within the geographic area commonly referred to as Canada, the United Kingdoms, or the Commonwealth by whatever means I deem necessary, and freely so if said transport is publicly owned. Be a steward of the land and the waters of the geographic area of Canada and the Commonwealth, including but not limited to any land I own or may claim.